Hello and good morning. Welcome to Morning Buzz. I'm the membership director here at the One Club for Creativity, your host and BFF, Adam Eisen. I'm so glad that you're here and I have a fantastic episode in store for you today. Before we get started, I want to remind you that there is a chat box, get to know it. It's right there on your right. Say hello. Actually, that might show up that way for you. Say hello. Tell us where you're from, how you're doing, what questions you have. We see it, so use it. Coming up, we have an incredible conversation on design, but stick around. I'll be introducing you to a very special guest artist at the end of the episode, and you won't want to miss it. But first, I'd like to welcome to the screen our friends at Tank. Tank is a leading independent design firm specializing in brand and experience design. If you've seen the FedEx logo, you've seen their work. Here to discuss design principles that stand the test of time, please use those raised hand emojis for Andrew Smiles, Executive Creative Director of Tank. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, guys. How are you doing? Great seeing you today.
Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Next up, we have Geoff Donegan, Executive Creative Director of Tank. Hey, Geoff, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to see everybody.
Thanks for being here. And finally, we have Jessica Maher, Design Director of Tank. Hey, Jessica.
Hey, good morning, Adam. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks for being here. Okay, guys, I'm going to pop off, hand things over to you. Can't wait to see what you guys have in store.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Just want to say thank you for giving this opportunity to share our work today. Got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. Excited about the idea of presenting some of our work and some of the work that's influenced us over the years. And again, yeah, let's get started. Design principles that stand the test of time. First, let's talk a little bit about Tank. Here at Tank, we believe that through design, deep visceral connections can be made, and that the essence of brand can be found through simplicity. Very important. Connect quickly. And that design isn't simply a tool to decorate solutions, it's a tool to explore and discover solutions. To us, this is our credo, this is what we believe in, this is what we live daily. So anyway, for today, we're going to go through 5 design principles that stand the test of time. Some of these examples that we will share embody the results of these principles. Inspiration, form, recognition, and endurance. But before we get there, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jessica, and she's going to take us through design trends.
Thank you, Andy. So I thought before we jump into design principles, we could talk a little bit about trends. And just preface this conversation, sorry, my screen share just jumped and I need to go back. There we go. I think as designers, we can sometimes equate trends with their biggest pitfall, which of course is blending into that sea of sameness. But trends, whether you love them or hate them, are one of the driving forces behind what looks and feels aesthetically pleasing. So when a client comes to us for new identity or brand refresh, 9 times out of 10, they're looking for something that sort of fits into their construct of contemporary design. So if we can learn how to navigate trends, understand them, be aware of them, we can either decide to do something entirely opposite, or even incorporate them into our work and make them our own. It can lead to something really interesting. In essence, that's sort of what Paul Rand was doing when he designed the first IBM logo. When he first started his career, Swiss design was relatively undiscovered in the US. He studied it and infused those principles into his own commercial work. I mean, I can't imagine if IBM had kept their original logo, or imagine if Nike didn't optimize for boldness and legibility, or Apple didn't assume the minimalistic look and feel that it does today. Not to say that they started the trend in minimalism, but they were certainly and continue to be one of the front runners as they continue to evolve. Even, I'm sort of embarrassed to say I maybe had one of the first iPhones and remember skeuomorphism and beveled buttons. I can't imagine if they haven't evolved from there. Anyway, one last comparison here before we jump into design principles. Couldn't resist adding this one in. I mean, honestly, I'm not, not even sure what to say about it, except maybe I feel really bad for the bird. But you can understand how, you know, trends can sort of lead some of this evolution. It's also sort of interesting to see that it's not always a steady path of progression. I think Burger King introduced a drastic change in 1999, a logo that almost looked artificial with this blue crest and accented burger buns. To see them revive the old logo was almost refreshing and I think certainly more appetizing. And interestingly enough, as we were looking at this the other day, Geoff, you even brought this up, what might not have felt trendy at the time certainly looks that way now. And that's sort of one of the downsides of trends, right? Anyway, yeah, so now that I've totally convinced you trends are important, I'm curious to hear what are sort of some of those design principles that can keep us honest and help us navigate these trends. So I'm going to pass it back to Andy to bring us home.
Thanks, Jess. Yes, so again, just to get the ball rolling here, obviously, one of the key principles to any brand, any design process is that of inspiration. What does it mean? Well, it's the way to get the cogs working, the brain working. What we know is it can be found anywhere. This approach for looking for the next big idea. It can be in a museum, skate park. It can be etching on a manhole cover. It can be in architecture. We're lucky here in Somerville to be surrounded by amazing architecture. Ian Pei, Frank Gehry, Steve Hall. So we have an abundance of inspiration here that we can pull from. It can even be found in your granny's basement if you look hard enough. But the importance here is to look beyond certainly the everyday, and also to step outside of I would say your comfort zone. I've been personally getting very intrigued by a lot of the work that's happening in Africa from a design perspective, but also in there's a great studio in Iran that I'm following called Studio Harvey, and they're doing amazing and contemporary work. So again, it's important to go and look everywhere. Again, we have all of these surroundings, beautiful imagery, beautiful artifacts, and now we have access to everything. We have Pinterest, Behance, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that is of key importance. Get the juices flowing, get the wheels turning. Look everywhere and look often. Never stop searching. The next part of this, obviously, and very important, is that of form and composition. We like this idea of looking for opportunities and space and magic within the form, helps us understand the meaning of brands. One of our our guiding principles is to look from Lubalin to Muller-Brockmann. Two people on two sides of the design spectrum. We like the idea of finding that magic in the form. This to us is kind of the bar that we must aim to reach. The ampersand being the human embryo in the mother and child logo by Herb Lubalin. And the families, it's there hidden in plain sight. The I, the L, the I. How simple can it be? No more simple than the identity of families. And then also, obviously, the FedEx brand. We do a lot of work with FedEx. We love the brand. We live and breathe it daily. It captures the core essence of the brand, that of delivery. from A to Z, the comfort, the reputation that your product, your package is going to get there without any problems. To us, these kind of principles start to evoke the idea of form, and also a little bit of a kickback here to the NASA worm, and how based on the Swiss principles of Muller-Brockmann, how you can leverage white space in just beautiful, harmonious ways, creating balance, contrast, and pretty much form in the context of communications. It's ever present today. You will see in web design, digital design. Very curious how all of this is going to transpire as we move into things like the metaverse, and how this notion of form, breathing space, white space will be leveraged in accordance to new channels of communication. And we just wanted to share some of the things that we've been riffing on recently. The Indigo brand, a revolution in transportation. They have an integrated platform for energy and propulsion system. This is some of their visual language. You've seen the product on the left, and some of the graphical artifacts on the right surrounding it. American Home Shield, it's a home warranty program, but it's right there. It says it all so simply. Home Shield. We can use these graphical elements, very flexible, to point to specific parts within the communication, as you see here. Rafter One. Rafter One, a merger of three very important brands that are leveraging the Salesforce platform. We had this, it was kind of like a hidden surprise when we were like, oh yeah, it's a unification. This we are one connection that became part of their graphic vernacular, which we're very proud to help them create. Showing some communication here. And then a automated drone program, leveraging artificial intelligence, creating emblems, again, just creating graphic thoughts and graphic ideas that can stand the test of time. They seem somewhat timeless. O'Reilly Media, showing how their graphical language can be interpreted, this idea of education and innovation and focus. The market itself becomes highly flexible in different forms of communication. And then moving on to design principle 3, recognition. So with this idea of form and composition in mind, how do we create recognition, right? How do we leave a permanent mark? Obviously, Michael Beirut from Pentagram, I think, sums it up ever so succinctly. That you think of the symbol or the logo as an empty vessel that we pour meaning into. Some prime examples of that are the Coca-Cola brand. You just need to see a sliver of the identity to know that it's Coca-Cola. It can be leveraged in beautiful, magical ways. IBM, to Jess's earlier point, the staple Paul Rand brand, and how that can be leveraged somewhat at times corporate, and then at times beautifully flexible. Lots of energy, lots of vibrancy. And then we like the idea of how flexible can the form, the composition, and the makeup of the brand be. So from there, we went into start looking at Vistaprint. What are the forms of Vistaprint, and how do those graphical components get leveraged in accordance to communication? We can take the elements of the identity and we can blow it up, that become the embodiment of all of these small micro businesses. Anyway, thank you for the time. I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague, Geoff.
Thanks, Andy. All right, so I'm going to talk about the last two principles, the first of which is endurance, and then I'm also going to talk about resonance. So these ones are principles that really pertain to the concept of branding as a whole, right? So not just the visual identity, but the idea of building brands, lasting and impactful brands. I first want to give an honorable mention to consistency, because I think consistency is obviously a foundational element of design and of building brand systems. that are impactful and that are ultimately enduring and resonant. But because it is so foundational, we think it probably doesn't warrant being a principle in and of itself, but it is of paramount importance. So building graphic language, like Andy talked about, that that facilitates that consistency and that recognizability is super important. But to us, I think the idea of endurance as a principle is somewhat more interesting. It's this idea that we can build brands that will stand the test of time, and really brands that are dynamic enough to handle whatever gets thrown at them, right? We are obviously we live in a changing world, and if we can build endurance into these brands, they will know how to act and react in order to be most effective, recognizable, and potent in that environment. First, I want to talk about the number of factors, right? There are a number of factors that affect how we think about brands and how we might build endurance into those things. So the first are internal factors, right? Is the brand itself aligned with its employees' values? Is it aligned with its customers' values? Is there clarity around the business goals and aspirations, and how do those things align with the brand? And then you have the external factors. So these are the direct competition that affects a brand. So are we maintaining a competitive edge? How are we positioning ourselves in relation to our competition in order to differentiate ourselves? Then there's indirect competition as well. What can we learn from industries outside of our own? Are we under threat potentially by new industries? So understanding the context outside of your direct competitive set, and how that might impact and affect the brand. Then there's also the ever-changing world of technology, right? So are we leveraging technology and changing technology in order to give ourselves a competitive edge, or are we getting left behind by not being able to embrace technology and be dynamic and leverage technology? And then the last one is one that we're particularly interested in, and that's this idea of cultural movements. So that's kind of the context, the global context within which all of these interactions are happening and within which a brand is operating. So the one thing that we know of all of these facets of a brand is that they're all subject to change, right? So cultural movements and shifts happen, technology changes, our competitive market changes, and we have to be able to build brands that are able to endure these types of changes. So that's really what endurance is about. It's about being able to give a brand its such a strong understanding and conviction in who the brand is and what the brand stands for, that they're able to endure the change that I'm talking about. So I mentioned cultural waves. This is the idea that there are things happening in the world that ultimately brands need to be conscious of in order to be relevant and to be able to be dynamic and to be able to keep up with these changes and ultimately be able to be lasting, because they're able to understand and recognize cultural movements and hopefully leverage those movements in order to be successful. So a couple of examples of this, Whole Foods is a really good one. They recognize this shift towards consumer demand for and taste for natural, locally sourced, high quality ingredients. And they ultimately became the brand that represented that on a huge scale, and were able to understand and recognize that cultural shift and then build a brand around it. I mentioned part of endurance is being able to know how to quickly act and react to what's happening in the world around you. So Nike was able to quickly recognize that as half the country, the NFL, lots of other organizations were turning their back on Colin Kaepernick, they knew that they needed to stand by his side and were able to leverage their own conviction and understanding of who they are and what they stood for, in order to know how to react to that situation. Dove is another example, being able to recognize that there are forces being put on people that are sort of encouraging false body image and being able to recognize that those standards are not universal and harmful, and being able to embrace a perspective that allowed them to zig where others were zagging, and be more relevant and understand that cultural movement. A really recent one is Patagonia's founders moved to give up the ownership of the company and put it in trust in order to let the profits from Patagonia be used to preserve natural land and unused land and promote the environmental causes. But I think what's interesting about this is, like, that's a cultural movement that Patagonia has been aligned with from the very beginning. What's interesting about their recent move is that I think it's also showing a consciousness towards this reaction that the world is starting to have to the billionaire class, and to the distribution of wealth, or the lack of the unhealthy distribution of wealth that's happening in the world. So there's subtle nuances to these cultural movements, and I think that the power is to be able to recognize them as they're happening and leverage them. But this is not just the remit of global, really established brands. Newer brands like Caddis are recognizing that there's cultural movements they can embrace as well. Caddis make reading glasses. And I think they recognize that, there's a whole generation of people aging within this environment of social media and influencer culture. And, it's putting unhealthy pressure on people as they age. And Caddis is building a brand that is reacting to that, and allowing people to embrace the idea of aging rather than be put under the pressures of staying young and aging gracefully, as they say. But understanding cultural movements is super important. What I think is paramount is that you can interact with them or ride those waves with authenticity, right? Because what we don't want to have happen is appropriation of cultural movements and shifts. And we saw this with the Kendall Jenner ad that Pepsi put together. Because it wasn't authentically true to, I think, other ways that Pepsi had presented their brand, it came off as disingenuous, and the public reacts to that. And this ad obviously was appropriating the Black Lives Matter movement. People reacted really negatively to it, and it became a very harmful brand expression for Pepsi. So it's super important that these things are done with authenticity. There's a number of ways that you can do that, right? So who you are at your core can be described kind of quite succinctly. So a good example of that, I think, is Nike describes their brand as the soul of Prefontaine and the heart of John McEnroe. So immediately, if you understand the character that describes, that shows, like, you can draw the line between that that soul and fire and their reaction to the Colin Kaepernick situation, right? You can see that they are able to act with conviction because they know exactly who they are at their core. At Tank, we develop brand blueprints. That's sort of our tool that we use to develop brands. And really it is about helping brands understand who they are, how they should act, because we know that the world is changing at a fast pace and brands have to be able to be dynamic. And the only way you can really be dynamic is to truly understand what is at your core and to be able to act with true conviction and authenticity. Another thing that's important about documenting and describing and understanding what's at your core is that gives you the power to build an army of advocates. So the idea behind building an army of advocates is that every little brand interaction that you have with any individual has the power to be viral and to spread. And if you can develop a brand and build an army of advocates, those advocates will build your brand for you, right? They'll share that enthusiasm for the brand. It starts internally. A lot of organizations fail, I think, to really succinctly describe who they are and what they stand for, and then give their employees and their teams the tools to be advocates. And then obviously, really importantly, if you can give your customers the tools to be an advocate for your brand, that's some of the most potent, brand building that you can do. A pretty good example of this is when I was a student, I worked at Nike Town. I had a low-level job. I was a stockroom assistant. So basically my job, I wasn't very good at it either, but my job was to take shoes from the shelves, like get a ticket, find the shoe, put it down a tube, and it would go to the shop floor, and they would, sell the shoes. But even at that level, when I started at Nike, they gave us 3 days of brand training. And like, I wasn't interacting with customers. I wasn't, part of the face of Nike in any way. I was like pretty much the lowest level you can be. I was hidden behind the scenes, getting shoes off shelves. But they really invested in helping us understand who the brand were. And ultimately, not only did it make me a little bit more proud and responsible and diligent with getting the shoes off the shelves, it really made me, outside of work, become an advocate for the brand and to share that enthusiasm and advocacy. So I think if you really authentically know who you are, you can describe that succinctly and potently, you will be able to build a framework to be able to endure the change that happens in the world and in your market. And that endurance is what gives brands longevity and ultimately makes them be able to be resonant, which is the fifth principle. So resonance, the idea of resonance was first coined by Kevin Lane Keller in his book, Strategic Brand Management. I mean, ultimately, what resonance is it is the description of a relationship between a brand and an individual. So an example might be, instead of thinking that I want a soda, I automatically think I want a Coke. Or I don't think I want a beer, I think I want a Sam Adams Wicked Hazy. When there's things that brands do to build that type of connection with individuals, right? And it is about your values and about the things that I can associate that are important to me, and I associate those things with a brand. Like when if I don't even need to buy clothes, I'll often check out Ruka because I know I really believe in Ruka sponsors artists in the same way that other brands sponsor athletes. So that shows me that they value something that I value. And so I have that relationship with them. I think of Ruka when I think of, what t-shirt I'm going to wear. So that type of resonance is really something that is built over time, but it is about that recurring relationship between an individual and the brand itself. Ultimately, that resonance is built on brand experience, and brand experience. I think the brand experience is really about the promise of an experience. It's about what you expect the next time you interact with that brand. It's in the case of FedEx, it's the idea that when I put a package into a FedEx drop box, it's as good as handing it to the recipient. So I already know, I trust, and I have confidence that when I put that package in FedEx's care, it's as good as delivered. So as a side note, actually, I should say, I know Adam mentioned at the start, if you've seen FedEx's logo, you've seen Tank's work. We did not design the FedEx logo, much as we wished we did. We're huge fans of it, we love it. We didn't design the FedEx logo, but we do, if you've interacted with any of FedEx's digital products, you've definitely most likely interacted with Tank's work. But that's what we do for FedEx now, is we help them ensure that their brand is effectively delivered through their digital channels. So that's ultimately where a lot of brand interaction happens in this day and age, right? A lot of the way that we interact with brands is through their digital experiences. And in order to make those interactions authentic and to make sure that we're building resonance through those interactions, we have to think about what it is about experience and what it is about the brand that we can translate into an authentic digital experience. So digital experiences are obviously ubiquitous, but they also suffer from a little bit of, they've become a little bit homogenous, right? And for good reason. I think they've become homogenous because we're developing a vocabulary and an understanding of how to interact with digital. But it also means that there's smaller and smaller opportunity for brands to really stand out unless they're very consciously thinking about that digital experience and how to execute on their brand through that experience. So that interaction, I think we build brands, we build brand pillars, and we can describe what brands represent. But there is an additional piece of work in understanding how that translates into an actual interaction. So I'll try and give a couple examples of how we develop experience principles. So for example, a brand pillar might be that we are committed to the planet, right? So when I think about a brand, I can understand what that means. The brand is committed to the planet. They have a sensitivity to the environment and to protecting the environment. And it's probably built on that cultural movement that is happening at the moment, where there is an increased consciousness for it. That's all great. But ultimately, that doesn't really tell me how to translate that commitment into the experiences that my customers have with the brand. So we will take that, that idea, that pillar, and then translate that into something that is a little bit more conversational or a little bit more relationship focused, right? So our experience principle that we build off being committed to the planet is that we, maybe we're gonna be honest about our impact. So now that spurs lots of thoughts about, if I'm developing a digital experience, how can I be honest about our impact, right? And we can start to think about tactical actions that we can take and design decisions we can make, user experience decisions we can make in order to show that honesty and be transparent about our impact. So you can imagine that maybe during our checkout flow, we give additional information about the impact of different shipping decisions on the environment. Or maybe within our e-commerce experience, we're transparent about the materials that we're using in our product. So all of these things then, now that I've translated that idea of our commitment to the planet, I'm not just saying we're committed to the planet anymore. Now we're really thinking about what can we do within our experiences to show that commitment and to be honest about it. And also ultimately, it kind of holds us accountable, right? If we have to be honest about our commitment to the environment, then we better have a commitment to the environment. So it really, it just translates that concept of commitment to one that is much more about the interaction and how we can show our customers that and have them, if that's their if their values align with ours, they'll be able to see and feel that truly through our digital experience, and it will separate us from our competitors. Another example, a quick one, might be that one of our brand pillars is reliable. So that's great to say, but what does that actually mean, again, when it comes to that interaction that we have with our customers? So we might translate reliable into we inspire confidence. And then that inspires thoughts, again, within our experiences. How can we inspire confidence? How can we show our customers that they can be confident in the interaction that they're having with us? So maybe we really confirm the information we receive from them, or we give them additional information about what's going to happen next in their interaction with us. So there's lots of things then. Ultimately, these experience principles become tools for product design teams to be able to build experiences that are authentically on brand. And that is what will separate brands from their competitive set and ultimately will help make brands resonant. So I think that is, oh, looks like I might have frozen. Okay, I think we're good. So to recap, the 5 principles that we talked about are inspiration. Obviously, as Andy mentioned, inspiration is everywhere and you should find it and you should expose yourself to it and you should surround yourself with it. Form, recognition, the idea of endurance, how you can set up a brand through design thinking, how you can set up a brand to be able to endure both the positive opportunities that it's presented with and any potential risks or negativity that happens in the world, and will help a brand understand how to react. And then the last, that idea of resonance. How can we really make sure that our brand is front of mind and has a deep and engaging and ongoing relationship with our customers? So I think that's all we have, apart from just to say thanks for listening to us, and we hope that this was helpful and useful, and there's some insights there that will maybe spur some good conversation.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
That was awesome. And I'm sorry, I should have rephrased that intro.
No worries. Like I said, we wish we had.
I was just being vague, they could do their own research to figure out who did what.
Yeah, Lyndon Leader was
Yeah.
the logo designer for FedEx, FYI.
We do have several questions in the chat, and I will just say to those watching, if you have a question, now is the time to pop it in. Great, I'm seeing some more come in. I'm going to try and consolidate because there are several. Let's see, let's pick the first one. Hypothetical situation. You as a designer believes that your client needs their brand to make a drastic visual update. They're not so sure. They're in love with their current branding. What do you tell them?
Let's validate their their hypothesis, our hypothesis, and see what customers are saying. Many different ways to do that, but get validation for what they want, what they believe, and what we recommend, and what we potentially believe based on the goals and objectives of their company.
I think as well, if you're part of the craft of being a designer is, and that's often overlooked, I think, is your ability to clearly articulate your ideas and the benefits of them and ultimately sell your work, right? Like you have to be able to, part of the craft is understanding why you're doing things, why you're recommending things, and being able to bring your clients on board. And obviously, like Andy said, a really powerful tool to do that is to prove it, right? So use research.
Show it.
But
Show
there's
your
also
work.
a craft in being able to present your ideas.
That's great. This one came in. What do you think of traditional brand frameworks like the brand house, in quotations? Any suggestion for other visual brand definition tools to frame brand hierarchy?
I think, I mean, obviously Andy and Jess probably have ideas about this too. I think what's important is to understand why the collection of brands exists, right? So it's about understanding what the strategy is behind, so maybe that collection of brands have come together through acquisition, or maybe they've been conceived of because they do sort of different things. But I think what's really important is to understand why the brands live together, right? Have they just been brought together for increasing market share, or have they been brought together to increase or to broaden a product offering? So there's lots of different ways or reasons that those brands come together. And I think that's what's important to understand before defining how they relate to each other. And the other important thing, as Andy said as well before, like with research, is to understand, especially brands that have been acquired through acquisition, what is their place in the market? How are they recognized? And is that part of the strategy for bringing those brands together? And I think then that helps you answer, is this now a house of brands? Are these now product brands beneath another brand? That helps you understand how to organize brands together, I think.
Yeah, we've been asked many times over our lives here at Tank for those, to look into those kinds of structures. Is it, like Geoff was saying, is it a house of brands? Is it a monolithic brand? What is the sub brand? What is the product brand architecture? And again, this will always be based on deeper insights and research that we do specific for our clients.
I mean, sometimes it comes down to, how much brand equity does that parent brand have to make some of those decisions on whether or not to make it a branded house versus a house of brands.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is coming up in a couple of different forms, so I'm going to choose one and hope that it addresses several. Okay. So when you see the example of Burger King reverting back to an older version of their logo, we all say, yeah, that's good. But the blue wording of this is great. But the blue swooshy version in between did last for over 20 years and not seen as a disaster in those 20 years. So can stand the test of time also mean good for its time?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. I think that's one of the things about trends is that they change over time. And I think it takes that, hindsight is 20/20 sometimes to realize, there were a lot of other decisions that went into that rebrand. I think initially that, in hindsight, when Burger King reverted back to the old logo, I think there were a lot of decisions around wanting to remove themselves from sort of the artificial food movement, that to get back to their roots, that went into that decision. So there are a lot of other factors, I think, that play into it, and that's not just a pure design decision.
All I know is that I love the Impossible Burger.
I know what I think what Jess was saying before, like we talked about this yesterday. Often you don't recognize trends really, or certainly good trends. I think you don't recognize them until after they've happened. And a lot of the power of trends is that at the time it did make Burger King feel progressive. And I think maybe even has spurred a trend because people will mimic it, right? Because it does feel fresh and it feels contemporary for the time. And so they're not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just important to understand them so that we can understand how to leverage them or how to pivot away from them as we move forward. And I think, you know, we will be able to look back on things like flat design as a trend to a certain extent, or the movement towards it. But we can see when we look back over the history of design that some of the marks that Andy and Jess showed at the beginning, they are enduring, you know.
I think it's an important question, right? You know, because the trend of late has been, you know, to almost revert to, you know, flat two-dimensional. Remember the kind of Beverly, you know, BMW Mini logo, right? And the BMW logo. So there has been this movement, and I actually like the movement of just kind of like going flat again. Another perfect example is what we showed earlier, the NASA worm, right? For the longest time, we had this hideous, you know, this hideous amorphic kind of swishy thing, very similar to what Jess shared for the Burger King logo. But now there's a hope and a wish to revert back to the NASA worm logo.
Absolutely. And
it's enduring, right?
Yeah.
We are seeing like this shift back to like 30 years ago and even beyond, I think, in so many, in fashion and design, just everywhere.
Yeah. Well, let's not talk about the UPS logo. What do you call it, Jess? What's the UPS logo? You have a great name.
I think Michael Beirut, or it could have been somebody else, but he called it the golden comb over.
I think this leads us into a good final question. Geoff, you kind of touched on this, and I think it picks up where we just left that off. As design tools evolve and environments where brands live is shifting, how much are you looking at the future when it comes to developing a brand or rebranding? And what kind of things are you taking into consideration?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. We always think of trying to develop brands that are set up for the future, right? That are future friendly and future capable. And it obviously it's hard to predict the future, but what we try and do is build a really solid foundation. Again, a big part of it is helping a brand understand how to react to that change. So we build flexible design systems and, you know, the most progressive design systems that technology allows us to build at the moment, and that's super important. But really what's important is understanding that we're not thinking just about the touch points that exist today. We're thinking about how to make a brand be able to be authentically itself on whatever touch point might exist. And I think having that lens and thinking about it through that lens is what allows brands to quickly sort of react and adapt and to be sort of consciously aware of how they can leverage technology and change. And then also, I think it is super important when you think about what we're designing for, it is super important to just be curious about technology, right? Like Andy mentioned the metaverse. I know he's super interested in the metaverse and what that means. And before that, it was like, what does AI mean? What does VR mean? And, you know, you have to have an inherent curiosity about those things in order to design for whatever change they bring, I guess.
Yeah, and just to add to that, yeah, we should all be very excited about it. You know, again, we're just scratching the surface with the metaverse, right? We're so used to interacting with brands on a kind of like two-dimensional level, right? The XY. Now we have to consider how do we move into the Z-axis with branding. You know, can we follow the Muller-Brockman approach to to that of white space and scale and form. So there's lots of things that we're certainly excited about, and we're looking deeply into that currently.
That's awesome. Well, we are at time. There's a couple more questions in the chat. I might kind of like link you up with some folks over email or something, but
Yeah, for sure.
but thank you guys so much for being here. Your work is definitely leaving a mark on our culture, and your support of the One Club is so appreciated. So thank you so much for making the time to join us this morning.
Thank you, Adam. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
too.
much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, for our next segment, I'm super excited to introduce our next guest. She is a One Club member and multidisciplinary artist based in Washington, D.C. We're going to bring up some of her work. Here we go. Her work can be found in both the digital space and within the community, from Instagram gift stickers, you've seen them, to murals throughout the DMV area. She's worked with leading corporations, brands, and organizations, including NASA, there we go again, Giphy, Pabst Blue Ribbon, Viacom, and Refinery 29. Please welcome the coolest guest we've ever had, and she's definitely way cooler than me. You may know her as Trap Bob, Tenbeete Solomon. Hey, Trap Bob, how are you?
Hey, Adam, I'm good. That was a great intro.
Thanks. I mean, your work is so cool, as we just saw. We're so excited to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. So let's dive into some of your work. Your work has a very specific lens, and I'd love to hear more about what inspires you and what it is you're trying to say or accomplish through your art.
So my underlying theme is that art will save the world. And so my mission is always to kind of knowingly and unknowingly bring art into people's lives. I think it's easy to overlook how important art is and how involved it is in our everyday. And, it's something that just brings hope and gets people thinking. I think it brings people together. It's a language that anybody can understand. And I just want to be kind of that reminder that everything around us is beautiful and artistic, and, just bring some color to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Your palette is like so joyful. I think what I really responded to in your art is how you tackle some really tough subjects, but there's still an element of joy and beauty in your work. And I think that it's really inspiring.
Yeah, I definitely want to bring the lighter side to any situation. And then a little more on my background. I'm Ethiopian, and in our culture, we are very humorous.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter what's going on, no matter how hard the subject is, we always find a way to laugh. And I find that in my personality and also in my work, especially with tough subjects, when it comes to activism, which I do a lot of work in, I want to bring hope to it. I want to bring positivity. I want to bring forward movement, because we know what the issues are. And I think all we can do now is work towards a solution, work towards a better world. And I think that comes from creating hope.
Yeah.
So I love to be able to make like protest posters, murals, I think are a great way to get a message out and to kind of lighten the community. And also a great way to document the movement and what's really going on, because we weren't able to document at a certain point.
Right.
And now we have so much technology and we have so many more options. So, I just try to fit it in where I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll have to explain this to me. Why Trap Bob? Where does it come from?
So long story short, I had the nickname Bob when I was younger.
Okay.
And it was just so simple versus my real name. And so, I was like, it's funny, I'll stick with it. And once I started really getting into art, which was right after undergrad, I'm a huge Gucci Man fan, like #1 fan. And he had dropped a mixtape, Trap God, at the time. And I was always listening to it when I was working. So I was like, oh, Trap Bob, that's perfect. And Bob is like a DC term. That's what we can call each other. And I felt like it all just came together. And it confuses people when they hear it, which I really like.
Yeah. It's definitely memorable. So we were talking yesterday, and you actually didn't start out as an artist. I'm curious to know more about your journey.
Yeah, I was really into art when I was a kid, and my dad actually is an amazing, amazing artist. He came from Ethiopia and got a full ride to Parsons. He used to do work for Disney. He did a lot of stuff, and he kind of raised me artistically without me realizing. I thought, you know, it was just normal, but I was really into art class. It wasn't pushed for me to be an artist or to even continue my education in it. And so I found myself kind of veering away from it, going towards like realistic things, trying to figure out what I want to do. You know, what's your dream job? What do you want to major in? Blah, blah, blah. And the only thing that really made sense to me was math growing up. So I went into business because I was like, you know, I'll do something with this at some point. And I went to University of Maryland, studied business and marketing. And as I was studying marketing, I just kept seeing, you know, how much art popped up in design and advertising and how it was so integral. And, you know, I thought, wow, I've always enjoyed this. I'm stressed out about pretending that I want to go and work, you know, for a company after I graduate. So I started just painting. I took an oil painting class, did things just for stress relief. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I never really felt passionate about anything until that point.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm sabotaging everything. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to do this and, you know, put my business degree to use as well. And
Sure.
it worked out great. So I started teaching myself Illustrator and started getting into illustration. And that helped me to start freelancing. And from there, I kind of just hopped from project to project, seeing what I'm interested in, trying different things, started teaching myself a little animation, got really excited about making GIFs. I think it's just such a cool little enhancement to my work, you know, to have some movement in there. Started doing murals. I really like huge paintings and I was tired of canvas. So it was a great opportunity and it really got me involved in the community.
Sure.
And I just had my first solo show last year, which was really great. Yeah, thank you.
Congrats. Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm kind of just going with the flow and seeing what I'm interested in. But I just like to have a lot of color around me.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's been one of your favorite art jobs?
I'd have to say the NASA project.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see through my work, I'm like obsessed with space and aliens and UFOs, really into that. And I got to create a portrait of Mary W. Jackson for NASA last year to celebrate the renaming ceremony of the DC headquarters after her. And so she was the first Black female engineer. And it was such an honor to even be selected to work on the project. It was so fitting for the things that I like to do and the way I represent in my work. And I actually had the opportunity to go to the NASA headquarters for the ceremony and present it to her family.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, dream come true. I still can't believe it happened.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So one thing I've loved learning about you is that you're not just an artist, but you're really a community leader. You're the founder of Gurla. You've created an exhibition that's coming up this weekend. We'll talk about that in a bit, but talk about these initiatives and your motivation behind them.
Yeah, so all the work that I do really in activism and the community still come from that underlying theme that I mentioned earlier of art will save the world. And so beyond my own art, you know, I wanted things that are bigger than me for me to be involved in and that the art can just kind of support. And so Gurla was a great organization that I started with some friends who are DJs, creatives, amazing women. And it was something that we felt was needed in the community, but we couldn't really put our finger on it. And so it kind of just started as a party of creating a safe space, just fun, good music, art, all kind of mixed together. And the reactions that we got from people were so amazing. We didn't realize how much it was needed. And so we quickly were putting on a lot of events, panels, doing partnerships. We worked with museums. We worked with, I think, like every type of organization you can imagine. We just kind of really found the places that needed us to come and support and to build a community too that wanted to be involved in those type of events and not just, you know, party every weekend. And it's been great. You know, we have taken a little time down during COVID. Everyone is so busy because, I mean, I work with really amazing women. And we did have an event earlier this year, which was amazing. And it was great to get back to it. And, you know, we're seeing where it goes, but our work flows through us as well and the projects that we do and take on. And beyond that, working in the community, I love getting into curation. I really love highlighting other artists in my community. You know, I always say that I am where I am because my community is so inspiring to me. Specifically in DC, everyone is so well, they're just so talented. You know, they can't really fit into even one category. Everyone is doing like 3 different types of projects, 3 different skills, 10 different talents that they have, and bringing it together, you know, and it's like you have to keep up, you know, you gotta be able to bring something to the space, and every event isn't just centered on one thing like art. It's like music, art, fashion, whatever you could think of. And so for me starting out, even I really got my name out there by doing a lot of parties years ago, where people would throw a party, there'd be DJs, I would bring my art, people would sell merchandise. And so it's really communal. And I think it raised me to be that type of leader in the community without really knowing it. You know, I just found myself being like, we need this, we need that. I know so many talented people. I have to find a way to highlight them. And so this weekend's event, which is really exciting, is going to be a gallery that I curated for an arts walk in Shaw, DC. And it's featuring myself and 4 other artists, Nia Katora, Maz Paz, Dieglo, and Snow God, all amazing artists. And then I'll also be live painting one of the walls in the gallery. So it's going to be awesome. And I'm just so excited to highlight these artists.
That's amazing. And if you're watching and you're in the DC area, you can scroll down on the episode page. We've put in all kinds of links for Trap Bob, her website, Instagram, and also a link out to that event this weekend. So if you're around, please check it out. But Trap Bob, it's been so wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I had such a great time. And the whole episode was so great. I really enjoyed Tank's talk.
They were awesome. And just if you're watching and you want to support Trap Bob or get to know her more, again, you can check out her Instagram, buy some of her merch, or even hire her. She is an ADC Cube winner and One Club member. So anyway, thank you, Trap Bob. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Well, that's all we have for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks on October 27th. Judy John, Chief Executive Creative Officer of Edelman, will be moderating a conversation with Nancy Vonk and Janet Keston, who are co-founders of Swim and Creative Hall of Fame inductees. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much and have a great day.